The moving truck sat in my driveway like a vulture, its metal doors gaping open to swallow what was left of my life. I stood there on the sidewalk, my knees threatening to buckle, watching strangers in gray uniforms carry boxes labeled with my name in thick black marker, my garden tools, my photo albums, the ceramic vase my late husband gave me on our 20th anniversary, all of it being loaded into that truck while Vanessa stood on my porch, her arms crossed, her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but radiated triumph all the same. "You have no place here anymore, Margaret," she said, her voice carrying across the lawn with a crispness that felt rehearsed. "This house belongs to Jason and me now. You need to accept that and move on." I clutched my suitcase so hard my knuckles went white. The Florida sun beat down on my shoulders, making my hospital-issue clothes stick to my skin. 3 weeks. I'd been in a coma for 3 weeks, and in that time, my entire world had been dismantled, piece by piece, decision by decision, all made without me. The metallic taste of shock filled my mouth as I watched my life being erased. How? The word came out as barely a whisper. How did this happen? Vanessa's expression didn't change. "Jason will explain everything when he gets home. For now, you need to leave. The new owners are moving in tomorrow." New owners. My house. The home I'd lived in for 40 years. Where I'd raised Jason. Where I'd buried my grief after losing Richard. Where every corner held a memory. Gone. I could feel my legs starting to give way. The sidewalk seemed to tilt beneath my feet, and I had to reach out to steady myself against the mailbox. The same mailbox where Jason used to wait for birthday cards from his grandparents. The mailbox Richard had painted blue one summer afternoon while I held the ladder and made jokes about his painting skills. Even this simple metal post was soaked in memories that Vanessa was trying to erase. "Margaret, are you listening to me?" Vanessa's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp and impatient. "The movers need to finish. You're blocking the driveway." I looked up at her. This woman who had smiled at me across Thanksgiving tables, who had hugged me at Jason's wedding, who had called me mom in that sugary voice that always felt just a little bit off. Her designer sunglasses were perched on her head, her white linen pants and silk blouse immaculate despite the Miami heat. She looked like success, like someone who had everything figured out. And maybe she did. Maybe her plan had been perfect from the start, and I was just too blind to see it. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. She shrugged, actually shrugged like my homelessness was a minor inconvenience. "That's not really our problem anymore. You should have thought about that before you let yourself become such a burden." The word hit me like a physical blow. Burden. Is that what I'd become? A burden to my own son? 3 months earlier, none of this seemed possible. 3 months earlier, I was living what I thought was a simple, beautiful life. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, and Miami was showing off. The temperature hovered in that perfect range where you could sit outside without sweating through your clothes, and my garden was responding to all the attention I'd been giving it. The bougainvillea I'd planted last year had finally taken, its magenta blooms cascading over the fence like a waterfall. I was on my knees, my hands deep in the soil, feeling that particular satisfaction that only comes from nurturing something alive. The earth was still damp from the morning watering, and I could smell the rich, loamy scent that always reminded me of possibility. My tomato plants were starting to set fruit, tiny green globes that would be red and ripe by summer. The herbs in the corner bed, basil and cilantro and oregano, released their fragrances every time the breeze picked up. This garden had been my therapy after Richard died, the place where I could put my hands in the dirt and feel connected to something larger than my grief. I'd been out here for 2 hours already, deadheading the roses, pulling weeds from between the pavers, checking the drip irrigation system Richard had installed the year before he passed. He'd been so proud of that system, spending weeks researching the best setup, drilling holes, laying tubing. "This way, Maggie," he'd said, using his nickname for me. The garden will thrive even when we're not here to watch it. Except he wasn't here anymore, and I'd kept the garden going by myself, learning to fix the emitters when they clogged, adjusting the timers for the seasons, adding new plants in the spaces where old ones had died. It was my way of honoring him, of keeping our shared dream alive. My phone rang, and I saw Jason's name flash across the screen. My heart did that little leap it always did when my son called. After Richard died, Jason became my anchor, my reason to keep the house, to keep going. He'd moved to Fort Lauderdale with Vanessa 5 years ago, chasing better job opportunities, but he called regularly and visited every few weeks. I stripped off my gardening gloves, not wanting to get dirt on the phone. "Hey, sweetheart," I answered, brushing dirt off my palm. "Mom, Vanessa and I want to come down this weekend. Maybe do that brunch place you love?" My whole face brightened. I could already picture it, the three of us at the Daily Creative, sitting on their outdoor patio, sharing stories over mimosas and those incredible guava pastries they made. That would be wonderful. I'll make up the guest room. Oh, and I found that photo album you were asking about last month, the one with pictures from your high school graduation. There was a pause on the other end, just a beat too long. "Actually, Mom, you don't have to do that. We're thinking of staying at a hotel. Give you some space, you know?" The words felt like a small rejection, though I tried not to take it that way. "A hotel? But you always stay here." "I don't mind the company, honey. Really, I love having you." "I know, but it's just easier this way. Vanessa has some work calls she needs to take, and you know how she is about privacy. Plus, we'll probably get in late Friday night, and I don't want to wake you." Something in his tone felt off, but I dismissed it. I was always looking for problems that weren't there. Always worried I was being too clingy, too needy since Richard passed. My therapist had warned me about this, about projecting my fear of abandonment onto my relationship with Jason. "Whatever makes you comfortable, honey. I'm just happy to see you." "Great. We'll pick you up Saturday around 11? "Perfect. I'll be ready." After we hung up, I sat there in the garden for a while, my phone still in my hand. The unease lingered, a small shadow I couldn't quite shake. Jason had been different lately, more distant, his calls shorter and less frequent. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, his attention somewhere else. I'd attributed it to work stress. He'd been promoted to senior account manager at his firm 6 months ago, and I knew the pressure was intense. But there was something else too, something I couldn't quite name. The way he'd started asking questions about my finances, about whether I'd considered downsizing, about my retirement plans. At the time, I thought he was just being a good son, looking out for me. Now, thinking back, I wonder if the trap was already being set. I went back to my gardening, but the joy had leaked out of it. My knees were starting to ache anyway. At 68, I couldn't spend quite as many hours kneeling on the hard ground as I used to. I gathered my tools, rinsed them with the hose, and went inside to shower off the dirt and sweat. The house was cool and quiet, the way it always was in the afternoons. I'd lived here for 40 years, bought it with Richard when Jason was just 2 years old. Every room held layers of memories. The living room where we'd hosted countless birthday parties. The kitchen where I'd taught Jason to make his grandmother's recipe for tres leches cake. The bedroom where Richard and I had talked late into the night about our dreams and fears. I walked through slowly, touching things as I passed. The bookshelf Richard had built by hand, each shelf slightly crooked but sturdy and filled with our collection of mysteries and thrillers. The photos on the mantel showing the progression of our family, young and hopeful, then with a baby, then a teenager, then just the two of us again as Jason grew up and moved away. The last photo was from Richard's 65th birthday party, just months before the cancer diagnosis. He was smiling, his arm around me, both of us blissfully unaware of what was coming. I should have appreciated these moments more. I should have known that nothing lasts forever. That weekend came and went pleasantly enough. We had brunch at the Daily Creative, And Vanessa was unusually quiet, letting Jason and me carry most of the conversation. She kept checking her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen. I remember thinking she looked stressed, that maybe things weren't going well at her real estate firm. I should have looked closer. I should have seen the calculation in her eyes when she asked about my refinancing plans, about whether I'd updated my will recently. "So, Margaret," she said, interrupting a story I was telling Jason about the neighbor's cat that kept visiting my garden. "Have you thought any more about what we discussed last time? About potentially refinancing to take advantage of the low interest rates?" I set down my fork, trying to remember what she was referring to. "I don't think we discussed that, dear. My mortgage has been paid off for 10 years now." She exchanged a quick glance with Jason, something passing between them that I couldn't read. "Oh, I must be misremembering. But even without a mortgage, a home equity line of credit could be useful. Give you access to cash if you ever need it for medical expenses or home repairs." "I have savings for that," I said, feeling defensive though I wasn't sure why. Richard made sure we were well prepared. Of course," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just saying, as someone who works in real estate, I see a lot of seniors who end up house rich but cash poor. It's something to think about." Jason put his hand over mine on the table. "Mom, Vanessa's just trying to help. She knows a lot about this stuff." "I know she does, sweetheart, and I appreciate the concern. But I'm doing fine, really." The conversation moved on, but the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa brought it up again. And again. Always couched in concern. Always framed as helpful advice. She sent me articles about reverse mortgages, about estate planning, about the benefits of putting property in a trust. Each time, Jason would call to follow up, asking if I'd read the information, if I'd thought about what Vanessa suggested. I started to feel pressured, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. They weren't asking me to do anything unreasonable. They were just offering advice. But something about the persistence of it, the way they kept circling back to my house and my finances, made me uncomfortable. Emma noticed it too. We were having coffee one afternoon, sitting in my garden while she helped me stake the tomato plants that were getting too heavy with fruit. "They're asking about your money again," she said, her expression skeptical. "Margaret, that's the 3rd time this month." "They're just concerned about me, making sure I'm taken care of. Or making sure they know exactly what assets you have." Emma had never been a fan of Vanessa. She said there was something calculating about her, something that reminded her of the con artists she'd dealt with in her paralegal days. "I'm not saying they're planning anything. I'm just saying, be careful. Don't sign anything without having me look at it first. Emma, they're my family." Family can hurt you worse than strangers, honey. Family knows where all your weak spots are. But I was too busy being grateful for the time with my son to notice the trap being set. The headaches started 2 weeks later. At first I thought it was just the Miami heat. Or maybe I needed new glasses. But they got worse, sharper, until one morning I woke up and the pain was so intense I couldn't see straight. I managed to call Jason before everything went dark. Actually, that's not entirely true. I called Jason, but Vanessa answered his phone. I remember that now, though the memory is hazy, filtered through the pain that was splitting my skull. "Margaret, it's early. Is everything okay?" "I need Jason. Something's wrong. My head..." The words came out slurred, and I remember thinking that was odd, that my mouth wasn't working right. "Margaret, calm down. What's happening? Are you hurt?" "My head. It hurts. I can't..." The phone slipped from my hand and I heard it clatter on the floor. The last thing I remember is the cool tile against my cheek and Vanessa's voice, tinny and distant, calling my name. Then nothing. Just darkness and silence for 3 weeks. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed, fluorescent lights burning my eyes, tubes snaking from my arms. A doctor whose face I'd never seen before was standing over me, speaking in that careful, measured tone medical professionals use when delivering news that might break someone. "Mrs. Chen, you've been in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks. You had a severe brain hemorrhage, but we were able to relieve the pressure. You're very lucky to be alive." Lucky. That word would come to haunt me. My mouth was dry, my lips cracked. I tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. "What happened?" "You collapsed in your home. From what we understand, you called your son's phone, and when they couldn't get a response, they called emergency services. The paramedics found you unconscious. You were brought here for emergency surgery to relieve the pressure on your brain." I processed this slowly, my thoughts moving through mud. 3 weeks. I'd lost 3 weeks of my life. "How long have I been awake?" "About 10 minutes. You've been coming out of sedation gradually. We need to run some tests, assess your cognitive function, make sure there's no lasting damage." Lasting damage. The words echoed in my head. What did that mean? Would I still be able to think clearly? To remember things? To be myself? Jason was there, sitting in the chair by the window, his face drawn and tired. When he saw my eyes open, he rushed to my side. "Mom, thank God. We were so scared." I tried to reach for him, but my arm felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Everything was heavy, sluggish. "Jason, you came." "Of course I came. I've been here every day." His hand squeezed mine, and for a moment, everything felt okay. My son was here. I was alive. We'd get through this together. Every day? The timeline confused me. How long? 3 weeks, Mom. You've been unconscious for 3 weeks. The information didn't quite sink in. 3 weeks was an abstraction, a number without meaning. "Your job. Did you take time off?" Something flickered across his face, too quick for me to identify. "Don't worry about that. Just focus on getting better." Vanessa appeared in the doorway then, holding 2 coffee cups. She'd cut her hair shorter, I noticed. It framed her face in a way that made her look harder somehow, more angular. "Margaret, you're awake. That's great news." She said it with the same inflection someone might use to comment on the weather. Pleasant but distant. No warmth. No relief. Just a statement of fact. Something in the way she said it felt wrong, but I was too fuzzy from the medications to process it properly. My eyelids were already getting heavy again, the effort of staying awake too much. I heard them talking in low voices as I drifted back under, something about doctors and discharge plans and paperwork that needed to be signed. I spent another week in the hospital, going through physical therapy, relearning how to walk without wobbling, how to hold a pen without my hand shaking. The therapists were patient but firm, pushing me to do more each day, even when I wanted to give up. My body felt like a stranger's, uncooperative and weak. Simple tasks like brushing my teeth or getting dressed exhausted me. The neurologist came by every morning, running tests, asking me questions to assess my memory and cognitive function. "What year is it? Who's the president? Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" I answered everything correctly, proud that my mind still worked even if my body felt broken. "Your recovery is remarkable," he told me on the 5th day. "Some patients who've had hemorrhages this severe never wake up." "You're very fortunate." Fortunate. Lucky. Everyone kept using these words, but I didn't feel fortunate. I felt confused and scared and completely dependent on others for the first time in my adult life. Jason visited every day, always solicitous, always concerned, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. A distance. A guilt, maybe. He'd bring me things from outside. Magazines I didn't ask for. Flowers that the nurses had to find vases for. Food from restaurants that I was too nauseous to eat. It felt like he was trying to compensate for something, though I couldn't imagine what. Vanessa came too, though less frequently. She'd sit in the corner, working on her laptop, taking calls in the hallway. Once. I woke from a nap to hear her on the phone just outside my room. The paperwork went through. Everything's in order. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's barely coherent most of the time. Yes, I'm sure. By the time she's discharged, it'll be too late for her to contest it. I said I'll handle it. I told myself I'd misheard, that the medications were making me paranoid. Vanessa was talking about a client, about one of her real estate deals. It had nothing to do with me. But the unease settled into my stomach like a stone and stayed there. When they finally discharged me, Jason picked me up. "We'll take you home," he said, but his voice had that same off quality from the phone call months ago. The drive to my house felt wrong from the start. Jason took turns I didn't recognize, and when I asked about it, he said he was avoiding construction. But there was no construction on our usual route. I'd driven it 1,000 times. We pulled into my driveway, and I felt a wave of relief seeing my house still standing, my garden still blooming. But when I walked through the front door, everything shifted. My furniture was gone. Not all of it, but the pieces that mattered. Richard's leather chair, the one he'd sat in every evening to read the paper, the leather worn soft from years of use. The dining table we'd picked out together on our honeymoon in Key West, solid mahogany with carved legs that had survived decades of family dinners. The family photos that lined the hallway, our visual history, all the moments that marked our life together. In their place were things I didn't recognize. Modern furniture with sharp edges and neutral colors. Abstract art on walls that used to hold my memories. I stood in the middle of the living room, turning slowly, trying to understand what I was seeing. This wasn't my house. Or it was. But it had been transformed into something alien, something that belonged to strangers. "What is this?" I turned to Jason, my head starting to pound again. "Where's your father's chair? Where are the photos?" Vanessa emerged from the kitchen, holding a wine glass. In my house, in the middle of the afternoon, drinking wine like she owned the place. "We did some redecorating. The house needed updating." "Redecorating? This is my house. Why would you change everything without asking me?" Jason put his hand on my shoulder, that gentle pressure that used to comfort me, but now felt like a weight, like he was trying to hold me down. "Mom, you've been through a trauma. Your memory might be a little foggy. We talked about this before your surgery. You said we could help modernize the place. I know you're sitting there, listening to this, screaming at me to fight back, to call the police, to do something. But you have to understand what it feels like when your own child looks you in the eye and tells you your memory is wrong. When the person you trust most in the world makes you doubt your own sanity. It's not like being lied to by a stranger. It's like the ground beneath your feet turning to quicksand. The neurologist had warned me that I might have some memory gaps, that the hemorrhage and the coma could have affected my ability to form new memories in the days leading up to my collapse. Was it possible? Had I agreed to this and simply forgotten? My head was pounding and I was so tired. The trip from the car to the house had exhausted me. "I don't remember that conversation," I said slowly. Carefully, trying to hold on to my certainty even as doubt crept in. "The doctors said this might happen," Vanessa added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She moved closer, and I could smell her perfume, something expensive and cloying. "Memory issues are common after what you went through. Don't worry, we're here to help you adjust." I wanted to argue, but I was so tired. The room was spinning slightly, and all I wanted was to lie down in my own bed. Except when I got to my bedroom, that was different too. New bedding in colors I'd never choose, gray and white where I'd always preferred warm earth tones. New curtains, heavy and modern, blocking out the light I loved to wake up to. My jewelry box was gone from the dresser. The small carved wooden box Richard had brought back from a business trip to Thailand. Inside had been my grandmother's pearls, my wedding ring, a pair of emerald earrings Richard gave me on our 25th anniversary. Where are my things? The panic was rising now, hot and sharp in my chest. Where's my jewelry box? Where are all my clothes? We put everything in storage, Jason said quickly, too quickly. Just temporarily while we renovated. We'll get it all back soon. But something in his eyes told me that was a lie. My son, my beautiful boy who I'd raised to be honest and kind, was lying to my face. And I didn't know how to process that truth without breaking apart completely. I want to see the storage unit. I want to get my things. Vanessa stepped between us, her expression hardening. Margaret, you're exhausted. You just got out of the hospital. Let's get you settled in, and we can deal with all of that later. But I need my clothes. We bought you new clothes. Everything's in the closet. Now why don't you lie down for a bit? You're clearly overwhelmed. She was ushering me toward the bed, her hand on my elbow, firm and insistent. I found myself sitting, then lying down, because I didn't have the strength to resist. The pillows smelled wrong, some floral scent that wasn't mine. Nothing was mine anymore. That night, after they left, promising to come back the next day to help me settle in, I sat in my foreign living room and tried to piece together what was happening. The house felt like a stage set, carefully arranged but hollow. I got up, my legs still unsteady, and started opening drawers, looking through cabinets. Most of my personal belongings were gone. Photo albums, letters, the small ceramic box where I kept Richard's wedding ring. In the kitchen, I opened every cabinet, finding dishes I didn't recognize, glasses in shapes I'd never bought. My old coffee maker, the one Richard and I had gotten as a wedding gift, was gone, replaced by some complicated espresso machine I didn't know how to use. Even the magnets on the refrigerator were different, generic landscapes instead of the collection of souvenirs from every place we'd traveled. I was shaking by the time I got to the trash can under the sink. I almost didn't look in it, but something made me pull out the bin to sort through the coffee grounds and crumpled paper towels. And there, at the bottom, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a document, torn in half but still readable. A property transfer form, dated 3 weeks ago, right when I was in the coma. And at the bottom, where my signature should be, was a scrawl that looked nothing like my handwriting. I pulled the pieces out with shaking hands, fitting them together on the counter. The document transferred ownership of my house from me to Jason Chen. The signature was crude, obviously forged, but it had been notarized. Someone had witnessed this fake signature and stamped it official. This wasn't redecorating. This was theft. My own son had stolen my house while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. I stood there at the kitchen counter for what felt like hours, staring at those torn pieces of paper. The signature wasn't even a good forgery. My handwriting had always been neat, precise, years of Catholic school training that never left me. This was a scrawl, shaky and uncertain. Anyone who knew me would recognize it as fake immediately. But who would check? Who would question a son managing his unconscious mother's affairs? I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at those torn pieces of paper, trying to understand how this had happened. How the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, could do this to me. The house creaked around me, familiar sounds in an unfamiliar space, and I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I thought about all the times I'd defended Jason to Richard. When Jason was 16 and got caught shoplifting on a dare, Richard wanted to come down hard, but I'd argued for understanding, for a second chance. When Jason dropped out of college in his junior year because he was finding himself, Richard was furious, but I'd supported Jason's choice, even though it meant the tuition money was wasted. When Jason made risky investments that lost thousands of dollars, Richard wanted to cut him off, but I'd helped cover his losses. "You're too soft on him, Maggie," Richard had said. "You're teaching him there are no consequences. He's learning. He's young. We all make mistakes. But he never seems to learn from them. He just expects you to bail him out, and you always do." Had Richard been right? Had I enabled this? Had I raised a man who thought he could take whatever he wanted from me because I'd never said no? When Jason and Vanessa showed up the next morning, I was ready for them. Or I thought I was. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, how I'd confront them with the evidence. But Vanessa took one look at my face and knew something had changed. "Did you sleep well, Margaret?" she asked, her eyes scanning the kitchen, probably looking for the document I'd found. I'd placed it in the center of the table, the two halves fitted together, held in place with a coffee mug at each end. "I found something interesting in the trash," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "A property transfer form, with my forged signature." The room went silent. Jason's face drained of color, but Vanessa just smiled. That cold, calculating smile I'd mistaken for warmth so many times before. "That's a very serious accusation," she said softly, pulling out a chair and sitting down like she owned the place. Which, according to this document, she did. Especially coming from someone who just woke up from a coma. Someone whose memory is, by the doctor's own admission, unreliable. My memory is fine, and that's not my signature. "Mom." Jason stepped forward, his expression pained. He wouldn't look at the document, wouldn't look at me directly. His eyes kept darting around the room like he was looking for an escape route. "You're confused. You signed that form before your surgery. Don't you remember? You were worried about what would happen if you didn't make it, and you wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, I almost believed him. Almost. But I'd looked at that signature too many times in the night. I knew my own handwriting, and that wasn't it. I picked up the document, holding it up to the morning light streaming through the window. "Look at this signature, Jason. Really look at it. Does that look like my handwriting to you?" He glanced at it quickly, then away. "You were sick, Mom. Your hand was probably shaking." "I was unconscious. That's the point. I couldn't have signed anything because I was in a coma." Vanessa stood up, smoothing her skirt with a casual gesture that somehow conveyed complete control. "The notary's stamp says otherwise. Are you accusing a licensed notary of fraud?" "I'm accusing you of fraud." Her smile widened. "Then we'll get a handwriting expert to verify it," I said, watching her carefully. "If you want to waste money on that, be our guest. But I think you'll find that the courts tend to side with clear documentation over the confused recollections of a recent coma patient." She paused, letting that sink in. "And speaking of courts, do you have any idea how much a legal battle would cost you? Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands. Do you have that kind of money, Margaret?" The trap was springing shut, and I could see all the teeth. She was right. Fighting this would bankrupt me, especially if they'd already drained my accounts. I'd be betting everything on a legal system that might not believe me, that might side with the official paperwork over my word. That's when I understood. They'd planned this. Every step. The timing of my collapse, the 3 weeks when I couldn't defend myself, the careful paper trail they'd constructed. Vanessa was a real estate attorney. She knew exactly how to make this look legitimate. "I want you both to leave," I said, my voice shaking now with rage instead of confusion. "Get out of my house." "Actually," Vanessa said, pulling out her phone and showing me a screen, "it's Jason's house now, legally. And we've decided it's best if you find somewhere else to live. You're clearly not well enough to maintain a property this size on your own." On her phone was an official document from the county recorder's office. The property transfer had been filed and accepted. In the eyes of the law, I no longer owned my home. I looked at Jason, waiting for him to contradict her, to say this had gone too far. But he just stood there, his eyes on the floor, his hands shoved in his pockets like a guilty child who couldn't quite work up the courage to confess. "Jason," I whispered. "Please, I'm your mother. I raised you. I gave you everything." He flinched like I'd slapped him, but he didn't look up. and that's when I knew I'd already lost him. Whatever Vanessa had promised him, whatever she'd used to corrupt the son I'd raised, it was stronger than 40 years of love and sacrifice. You have until the end of the week to collect your personal belongings, Vanessa continued, already moving toward the door. We'll have a moving company come to help you. Be reasonable about this, Margaret. Make it easy on everyone. They left, and I stood in my kitchen that wasn't mine anymore, holding torn pieces of a forged document, feeling the weight of absolute betrayal crushing my chest. Have you ever felt that? That moment when you realize the person you trusted most in the world has been plotting against you? It's not like a sudden pain. It's like waking up and discovering you've been bleeding out slowly for months, and you're just now noticing the blood. I made it to the couch before my legs gave out. I sat there, in that strange room filled with furniture I didn't choose, and I let myself break. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the full weight of what had been done to me. The sobs came from somewhere deep, a place I'd kept locked since Richard died. I cried for my husband, who wasn't here to help me. I cried for my son, who'd become someone I didn't recognize. I cried for myself, for the naive trust I'd extended to people who saw it only as a weakness to exploit. The tears left me hollow and aching, but somehow clearer. I must have cried for an hour, maybe longer. The grief came in waves, each one threatening to pull me under. I remembered Jason as a toddler, his tiny hand in mine as we walked through the park. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike, running alongside him until he found his balance. I remembered his high school graduation, the pride in his eyes when he told me he'd been accepted to college. Where had that boy gone? When had he become this man who could look at his unconscious mother and see only an opportunity? The worst part was the memories that now felt tainted. Every hug, every "I love you, Mom," every time he'd called just to check in over the past year. Had any of it been real? Or had I been so desperate for connection after Richard's death that I'd missed all the signs of what was really happening? I thought about the last conversation Richard and I had before he died. He'd been in the hospital, weak but still lucid, and he'd gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll be careful, Maggie. Don't let anyone take advantage of you, not even Jason." I'd laughed it off at the time, told him he was being paranoid, that Jason would never hurt me. Richard had just looked at me with those knowing eyes and said, "I hope you're right. But people change when money's involved. Just promise me you'll protect yourself." I hadn't promised. I'd changed the subject, uncomfortable with the implication that I needed to be protected from my own son. Now, sitting in my stolen living room, I wished I could go back to that moment and make that promise. I wished Richard were here to tell me what to do, how to fix this catastrophic mistake I'd made in trusting Jason. But Richard was gone, and I was alone. Or I thought I was alone. When I could finally breathe again, I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust. Emma Rodriguez had been my friend for 30 years, ever since we met in a gardening club. She'd retired from her job as a paralegal 5 years ago, but her mind was still sharp, and she had a healthy distrust of people who smiled too much. "Margaret, I thought you were still in the hospital." "Emma, I need your help. Something terrible has happened." "I'll be right there." She was at my door within an hour, and when I showed her the forged document, her face went hard. "Oh, honey, this is bad. This is really bad. Can they do this? Can they really take my house?" Emma studied the document, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She held it up to the light, examined the signature, the notary stamp, the date. "The signature is obviously forged, but proving that in court will be expensive and time-consuming. And if they've filed this with the county, there's a paper trail that says the transfer was legitimate. We need to find out what else they've done." Over the next week, while Jason and Vanessa were conveniently away, Emma and I turned into detectives. We started with my bank accounts, and what we found made my stomach turn. Every account I had, checking, savings, even the small investment portfolio Richard had set up for me, had been systematically drained. Small transfers at first, barely noticeable, $50 here, $100 there, but getting larger over time. Then, during the 3 weeks I was unconscious, massive transfers. My checking account, which had held almost $15,000, was down to $200. My savings account, my emergency fund that Richard and I had built over decades, had been emptied completely. The investment account showed a series of early withdrawal transactions, each one eating into the principal and triggering tax penalties. "They've taken everything," I said, staring at the nearly empty account balances on my laptop screen. 40 years of savings, Richard's life insurance, all of it. Emma's jaw was tight with anger. "Did you give Jason power of attorney?" "Years ago, when Richard first got sick. I never updated it because I trusted him. That's how they did it. He used the power of attorney to access your accounts while you were in the coma." She opened a new tab on the computer. "We need to check your credit report. If they did this, they might have done more." The credit report showed 3 new credit cards I'd never applied for, all maxed out. American Express, Visa, MasterCard. Combined, they'd run up almost $40,000 in debt in my name. The charges were for things I'd never buy: designer clothes, expensive electronics, furniture, a down payment on a car. They'd opened them using my information during those 3 weeks, run up debt in my name, and stuck me with the bill. The scope of the theft was staggering. They hadn't just taken my house. They'd taken everything. My home, my savings, my financial security, even my credit rating. They'd left me with nothing but debt and the clothes on my back. "Why would he do this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I gave him everything. I sacrificed so much to make sure he had a good life." Emma put her hand over mine. "Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest, because they know exactly where to cut." We kept digging. Emma had contacts from her paralegal days, people who knew how to find information that wasn't supposed to be public. One of them was a private investigator named Carlos who owed Emma a favor. He agreed to look into Vanessa's business dealings discreetly. What we discovered over the next few days was that this wasn't just about greed. It was about Vanessa's ambition and her desperation to maintain an image of success that was rapidly crumbling. Vanessa's real estate firm had been struggling for over a year. Carlos found court records showing she'd been sued by 2 clients for misrepresentation. Her partnership at the firm was under review. She'd made some bad investments in properties that never appreciated the way she'd promised her investors. She was drowning in debt, maintaining a lifestyle she could no longer afford, driving a leased Mercedes and wearing designer clothes she'd bought on credit. And then there was the condo development deal. A luxury high-rise on Miami Beach, partnering with developers from New York. It was her chance to recover everything she'd lost, to prove she was still a player in Miami's cutthroat real estate market. But the developers wanted to see skin in the game. They wanted her to put up $500,000 as her share of the initial investment. $500,000 she didn't have. My house, sitting on prime Miami real estate in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying, was worth over $800,000. If she could get me to sign it over to Jason, they could immediately take out a home equity loan, get the cash they needed, and fund Vanessa's comeback. I wasn't just a victim of opportunity. I was the solution to all her problems. "She's been planning this for at least 6 months, Carlos told us, spreading out documents on my dining room table. "Look at this. She contacted 3 different notaries about witnessing documents for someone with limited mobility. She was setting up her network, finding people who wouldn't ask too many questions." Emma and I pored over the evidence. There were emails to Jason from Vanessa dating back 8 months, casual mentions of my house's value, suggestions that I was getting too old to manage such a large property, seeds being planted long before my collapse. The emails we found, buried in Jason's rarely used Gmail account that he'd left logged in on my old computer, laid it all out. Vanessa had been pushing him for months, even before my collapse, to convince me to sign over the house. She'd framed it as caring for my future, protecting me from the burden of home ownership. But the subtext was clear. She wanted my asset, and she was willing to manipulate my son to get it. There was one email that made me physically sick to read. It was from Vanessa to Jason, dated 2 days after I collapsed. "This is perfect timing. She'll never know what happened. We get her to sign everything over while she's under. And by the time she wakes up, it'll be too late for her to fight it. Your mom loves you. She'll understand eventually. And we'll be set for life. The condo deal is going to make us millions, Jason. Millions. This is our chance. Don't let some misplaced guilt ruin this for us." Jason's response was short. "I don't know if I can do this. She's my mother." Vanessa's reply was even shorter. "Then you're not the man I thought I married. I need a partner who's willing to do what it takes to succeed. If you can't be that, then maybe we need to reconsider this marriage." There were more emails after that, Jason's resistance crumbling bit by bit as Vanessa alternated between threats and promises. She threatened to leave him, to expose his past mistakes to his employers, to ruin him financially. And she promised him wealth, security, a life beyond anything he could achieve on his own. She'd manipulated him with threats, with promises, with the slow erosion of his moral compass until he convinced himself this was acceptable. He'd betrayed me to keep his wife happy, to maintain his marriage, to chase a dream of wealth that Vanessa had dangled in front of him. But here's what you need to understand. I didn't want to believe it. Even with all the evidence laid out in front of me, part of me kept making excuses. He's stressed. She pressured him. He'll make it right. He'll come to his senses and fix this. Because accepting that my son had done this willingly meant accepting that I'd failed as a mother. That somewhere along the way, I'd raised someone capable of this kind of cruelty. Emma saw me spiraling. "Stop it. This isn't your fault. She's a manipulator, and she found his weakness. But that doesn't absolve him. He made choices. He chose this. He chose her over you. He chose money over integrity. Those were his decisions, and he has to live with them." She was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. We documented everything. Every transfer, every forged signature, every email that showed premeditation. Emma had me open new bank accounts in my name only, ones Jason couldn't access. We moved what little money was left somewhere safe. Then we went to see a lawyer. Martin Reeves had handled Richard's estate after he died, and he'd done it with compassion and efficiency. When we walked into his office and I told him what had happened, his normally calm expression turned thunderous. "They did this while you were in a coma?" "All of it. The house transfer, the bank accounts, the credit cards, everything." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. "Margaret, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be a fight. They've created a paper trail that makes it look legitimate. Proving the signatures were forged will require expert analysis, court proceedings, and a lot of time. Do you have the resources for that?" "I have about $12,000 left in an old savings account they didn't find. Is that enough?" His expression told me it wasn't. "We're talking tens of thousands to fight this properly. Maybe more. Handwriting experts, court fees, depositions, and even if we win, it could take years." I felt the hope that had been building start to crumble, but then Emma spoke up. "What if we don't fight it in court? What if we expose them publicly first?" Martin raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Vanessa's a real estate attorney. Her reputation is everything. If people knew what she did, if we made this public in a way that couldn't be ignored, would that change things?" A slow smile spread across Martin's face. "It would change everything. Her license would be at risk. Her business partners would distance themselves. The condo deal she's working on would fall apart. The pressure alone might make them settle." "And how do we make it public?" We find the right venue, the right audience, and we present the evidence in a way that spreads like wildfire before they can control the narrative. That's when I started to shift from victim to strategist. The sadness that had been drowning me began to harden into something else. Something cold and clear and focused. They'd taken my home, my money, my dignity. But they'd underestimated one crucial thing. They'd underestimated my will to survive. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something I'd never done before. I lied. I pretended. I played the role of the confused, defeated old woman they expected me to be. When Jason called to check in, I sounded frail and accepting. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm looking at apartments. You were right. The house was too much for me to handle." When Vanessa stopped by to help me pack, I thanked her for her kindness, let her think she'd broken me completely. "You've been so patient with me. I know I haven't been easy to deal with." Every word tasted like poison, but I smiled and nodded and let them think they'd won. At night, while they thought I was sleeping, Emma and I planned. We mapped out exactly how we'd expose them, who we'd tell, what evidence we'd present. Martin helped us build the case, documenting every crime they'd committed in language that would hold up in court. We created a timeline showing the pattern of financial abuse. We compiled the forged documents. We organized the emails into a narrative that showed premeditation and conspiracy. And we prepared a presentation that would make everything undeniably clear. The stress was enormous. Every time I heard a car in the driveway, my heart would race, terrified they'd discover what we were doing. I'd close my laptop quickly, hide the papers in Emma's car, act like I was just sorting through old photos. There was one close call when Vanessa showed up unannounced and found me on the computer. I'd been reviewing the email evidence, and I barely managed to close the browser before she saw. "What are you doing?" she asked, her eyes narrow with suspicion. "Looking at apartments," I said, keeping my voice steady. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. "You were right. I do need somewhere smaller, easier to manage." She relaxed, that predatory smile returning. "That's very sensible of you, Margaret. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." She came closer, looking over my shoulder at the screen. I'd pulled up an apartment search website just in time. "Have you found anything promising?" "There's a nice one-bedroom in Coral Gables. Ground floor, so no stairs. I'm thinking of going to see it this weekend." "Good. That sounds perfect for you. Much more appropriate than rattling around in that big house by yourself." Reasonable. The word echoed in my head long after she left. They wanted me to be reasonable, to accept my victimization quietly, to disappear without making trouble. But a betrayal this deep doesn't heal, and I wasn't about to let it scar over without leaving a mark of my own. The plan came together piece by piece. We'd need witnesses, people who knew me and Jason, who could see the evidence and spread the word. We'd need a venue, somewhere public enough that Vanessa couldn't control the narrative. And we'd need the perfect moment, when their guard was down and they thought they'd gotten away with it. The opportunity presented itself when Jason called to invite me to dinner. "Vanessa and I want to take you out," he said, his voice carefully cheerful. "Kind of a peace offering. We know this transition has been hard on you." "That would be lovely," I said, infusing my voice with gratitude I didn't feel. "Where should we meet?" "There's a new place on South Beach, Sapphire Waters. It's fancy, but we're celebrating. Vanessa just closed a big deal." Of course she did, probably using my money to finance it. "That sounds wonderful. Can I invite Emma? She's been such a help these past few weeks." There was a pause. I could almost hear Vanessa in the background, telling him to say no. But Jason couldn't quite bring himself to be that cruel. "Sure, Mom, that's fine." I hung up and immediately called Emma. "They took the bait. We're going to dinner Friday night at Sapphire Waters." "That's perfect. That place is always packed. Lots of witnesses." Martin helped us prepare the final pieces. We created a slideshow, ostensibly a collection of family photos spanning Jason's life. But interspersed throughout were screenshots of the forged documents, the email exchanges, the bank statements showing the theft. We'd present it as a tribute, and by the time anyone realized what they were actually seeing, it would be too late to stop it. We rehearsed it multiple times in Emma's living room. She'd play the slideshow while I practiced my speech, timing it perfectly so each revelation landed with maximum impact. Martin coached me on staying calm, on not letting emotion derail the message. "The key is to be factual," he said. "Don't yell, don't cry. Just present the evidence and let it speak for itself. Vanessa will try to make you look hysterical or confused. Don't give her that opening." The night before the dinner, I barely slept. I kept going over everything in my mind, imagining how Jason would react, what Vanessa would say. Part of me still hoped that when confronted publicly, Jason would break down and confess, would beg for forgiveness, and try to make things right. The mother in me wanted to believe there was still good in him, that Vanessa had corrupted someone who was fundamentally decent. But another part of me, the part that had spent weeks looking at the evidence, knew better. Jason had made his choices. He'd signed the documents. He'd drained my accounts. He'd stood by while Vanessa planned to make me homeless. Whatever good might have existed in him once, it was buried too deep to matter now. Emma stayed with me that night. We sat up late, drinking tea, talking about everything except what was about to happen. She told me about her grandchildren, about the vacation she was planning to Spain, about normal things that reminded me there was still a world outside this nightmare. Around midnight, she looked at me seriously and said, "Margaret, you know there's no going back from this, right? Once you do this tomorrow, your relationship with Jason is over. Permanently." "It's already over, Emma. It ended the moment he forged my signature." "I know. I just want to make sure you're ready for what comes after. The loneliness, the grief, losing a child, even a child who betrayed you, is still a loss." I thought about that for a long moment. I've already done my grieving. I've been grieving for the son I thought I had. Tomorrow, I'm just making it official. The day of the dinner, I dressed carefully. Not too nice, not too shabby. I chose a simple navy dress, the kind of thing a woman might wear when she's trying to maintain her dignity after a difficult time. I wanted to look like someone who'd been beaten down but was trying to hold herself together. I wanted them to underestimate me one last time. Emma picked me up, and we drove to South Beach in silence. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was the cold weight of what I was about to do. "Are you sure about this?" Emma asked as we pulled into the parking lot. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Sapphire Waters was exactly the kind of place Vanessa loved. All glass and chrome, with ocean views and a wine list that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. The hostess led us to a table near the center of the restaurant, perfectly positioned for maximum visibility. Jason and Vanessa were already there, looking prosperous and comfortable in their stolen wealth. Jason wore a new suit, something expensive and tailored. Vanessa was dripping in jewelry I didn't recognize, diamonds that caught the light every time she moved her hands. "Mom." Jason stood to hug me, and I let him, even though his touch made my skin crawl. "You look good." "Thank you, sweetheart. You both look wonderful, too." We sat, and the small talk began. Vanessa dominated the conversation, talking about her latest real estate ventures, about the new car she'd just bought, about their plans to renovate my house before putting it on the market. Each word was a knife, but I smiled and nodded and played my part. "We're thinking of opening up the living room, maybe adding French doors to the garden. The house has such great bones. It just needs to be updated for modern tastes." "That sounds lovely," I said, sipping my water. "I'm sure you'll make it beautiful." "Oh, we will. I have a designer friend who's dying to get her hands on it. She says it could be featured in Miami home and garden once we're done." My house, my memories, reduced to a before and after spread in a magazine. Other family members began to arrive. I'd invited them, claiming Jason wanted a family celebration. His Aunt Diane, his cousin Marcus, even a few family friends who'd known him since childhood. By the time everyone was seated, we had a table for 12, and the restaurant was buzzing with the kind of energy that comes from good food and expensive wine. "This is quite a turnout," Vanessa said, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She couldn't figure out my angle, but she knew something was happening. "Well, I wanted to celebrate with everyone," I said sweetly. "It's not every day your son gives you such an important gift." Jason shifted uncomfortably. He'd always been bad at hiding his feelings, and I could see the guilt flickering across his face. But Vanessa squeezed his hand, a gesture that looked affectionate, but I recognized as controlling. Dinner progressed through multiple courses. I barely tasted any of it. My stomach was in knots, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Emma kept catching my eye, giving me small nods of encouragement. She had the slideshow loaded on her tablet, ready to project onto the restaurant's screen system that Martin had convinced the manager to let us use. The appetizers came and went, then the main courses. I watched Jason cut his steak, watched Vanessa laugh at something Aunt Diane said, watched the whole table relax into the illusion that this was just a pleasant family dinner. Finally, as dessert was being served, I stood and tapped my wine glass. The table went quiet, faces turning toward me expectantly. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," I said, my voice carrying across the space. "The past few months have been incredibly difficult for me. I had a health crisis and I'm still recovering. But through it all, my son Jason and his wife Vanessa have been so attentive, so caring, so thorough in managing my affairs while I was incapacitated." Jason's face went pale. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. In fact, they were so thorough that I thought we should all see exactly what they accomplished. "Emma, would you mind?" Emma stood and connected her tablet to the restaurant's display system. The screen at the front of the room lit up with a photo of Jason as a baby, me holding him, my face full of love and hope. A few people smiled, expecting a typical sentimental slideshow. But then the images changed. The forged property transfer form appeared, with my supposed signature circled in red. Then the bank statements, showing the systematic draining of my accounts. Then the credit cards I never opened. Each image stayed on screen just long enough to register before moving to the next. The table went silent. Around us, other diners began to notice. Phones came out. People started taking pictures of the screen. Then came the emails. Vanessa's words, cold and calculating, projected for everyone to read. "This is perfect timing. She'll never know what happened." Gasps rippled through the room. Jason tried to stand, to say something, but Aunt Diane put a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down. "Sit down and watch," she said, her voice like steel. More emails, more evidence. The paper trail of their betrayal laid out in high resolution for everyone to see. I watched Vanessa's face cycle through shock, rage, and finally a kind of trapped panic as she realized what was happening. The final slide appeared. It was a simple message in white text on a black background. "I may have been asleep, but I'm wide awake now." The restaurant erupted, not in applause, but in angry voices, in accusations hurled at Jason and Vanessa. Aunt Diane was crying, demanding to know how her nephew could do such a thing. Marcus was on his phone, probably calling other family members. The restaurant manager appeared looking alarmed at the commotion. I stood there, calm in the center of the storm, and looked at Jason. He couldn't meet my eyes. His hands were shaking, his face the color of old newspaper. Vanessa, true to form, tried to salvage the situation. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Margaret is confused. She's not well. The doctor said she might have memory problems." "I have a handwriting expert's report that says these signatures are forged," I said clearly. "I have bank records showing unauthorized transfers. I have emails that prove premeditation. The only confusion here is how you thought you'd get away with this. A woman at a nearby table, who'd been quietly filming the whole thing, spoke up. I know you. You're Vanessa Reese, right? The real estate attorney? I was considering working with you on a property deal. Not anymore. Others chimed in. Vanessa's reputation, the thing she'd built her entire career on, was crumbling in real time. Her face went from angry to devastated as she realized what this would cost her. Mom, Jason finally found his voice. Mom, please, let's talk about this privately. We're past private conversations, Jason. You stole from me while I was unconscious. You forged my signature. You emptied my bank accounts. You conspired to leave me homeless. And you did it all while pretending to care about me. Vanessa made me, he said, the words tumbling out desperately. She said if I didn't help her, she'd leave me. She said we deserved this money, that you didn't need it. So you chose her over me. You chose money over integrity. You chose to become a thief rather than disappoint your wife. The truth of it hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Jason broke down, his head in his hands, sobbing like the child he used to be. But I felt nothing watching him cry. The son I'd loved was gone. This man who wore his face was a stranger. Vanessa, seeing that the situation was completely beyond her control, grabbed her purse and stood. This is harassment. I'm leaving. Actually, Martin Reeves stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the bar. You're not. I've already contacted the State Bar Association about your conduct. They'll want to speak with you about misusing your legal knowledge to commit elder abuse, and the police will want to discuss the forgery charges. Her face went white. You can't prove anything. We have everything documented. Dates, times, amounts, communications. You orchestrated a systematic theft from a vulnerable elderly woman. In Florida, that's a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. The restaurant manager approached, looking uncomfortable. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave. You're disrupting the other guests. We left, the whole family spilling out into the warm Miami night. The damage was done. By morning, half of South Beach would know what Jason and Vanessa had done. Vanessa's business would be destroyed. Jason's reputation would be in tatters. And I would begin the long process of legally reclaiming what was mine. The legal battle that followed was brutal but swift. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the destruction of Vanessa's professional reputation, they agreed to settle within 3 weeks. Martin filed an emergency motion to freeze all my assets the next morning. The judge, presented with the evidence of forgery and elder abuse, granted it immediately. Every account, every transfer, every transaction was frozen pending investigation. Vanessa's law firm dropped her within 48 hours. The State Bar opened an investigation. Her business partners in the condo development deal pulled out, citing reputational concerns. The whole house of cards she'd built collapsed in days. I got my house back. I got most of my money back, though some of it was gone forever, spent on Vanessa's business ventures and luxury purchases. The credit card debt was forgiven once the companies saw the evidence of fraud. The credit bureaus removed the fraudulent accounts from my report. Jason and Vanessa separated 2 months later. She filed for divorce, claiming he'd acted without her knowledge, trying to salvage what she could of her career. But the State Bar suspended her license pending investigation, and most of her clients fled. The real estate deal she'd been so excited about fell through when her business partners discovered what she'd done. Jason tried to contact me several times. Letters, emails, messages left with Emma. All of them said the same thing. He was sorry. He'd been manipulated. He wanted to make things right. But apologies can't unbreak a trust this shattered. Some actions have consequences that outlast the regret. I changed all the locks on my house the same day I got the keys back. I stood at the front door, my hand shaking as I turned the new key in the new lock, and when it clicked open, I burst into tears. This time, They were tears of relief. My house, my home, mine again. I hired a cleaning service to remove every trace of their occupation. The modern furniture went to charity. I repainted the walls back to the warm colors I loved, spending weeks on ladders with a roller, covering up the stark whites and grays with the warm terracottas and soft creams that felt like me. I found Richard's leather chair in a consignment shop downtown. The owner, a kind older man, recognized me from the news coverage of my case. "I'll give you the family discount," he said with a wink, charging me half of what it was worth. The chair smelled like someone else's house now, but I had it professionally cleaned and conditioned, and slowly it started to feel familiar again. The photos were harder to recover. Many of them were gone forever, tossed out or sold. But I put out a call on social media, asking friends and family to share any photos they had of our family gatherings, holidays, celebrations. Slowly, my walls began to fill again with memories. Not the same ones, but enough to remind me of who I'd been before all this happened. The garden took longer to recover. They'd neglected it during my coma and the months after, and many of my plants had died from lack of water and care. The bougainvillea I'd been so proud of had turned brown and brittle. The tomatoes had withered on the vine. The herbs were nothing but dried stalks. But gardens are resilient. With patience and care, life returns. I spent hours clearing out the dead plants, enriching the soil with compost, preparing the beds for new growth. I planted new bougainvillea, choosing a variety with even brighter magenta flowers than before. New roses and colors I'd never tried. New herbs for my kitchen, and this time I added lavender, because I'd read it was good for reducing stress and anxiety. Every day I worked the soil, I felt a little more like myself. My hands in the dirt, the sun on my back, the simple satisfaction of nurturing something alive. This was my meditation, my therapy, my way back to wholeness. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before started stopping by to check on me. Some brought plants for the garden, others brought casseroles and kind words. The woman across the street, whose name I'd embarrassingly forgotten despite living there for 40 years, came over with a tray of homemade empanadas. "I should have visited more when you were going through all this," she said. "We all should have. We saw them coming and going, changing things. But we didn't want to intrude. I'm sorry we didn't pay better attention." "It's not your fault," I told her. They were very good at looking legitimate. But her words made me realize something. I'd isolated myself after Richard died. I'd turned inward, focused on Jason because he was all I had left. I'd let my friendships drift, stopped going to community events, stopped being part of the neighborhood. That isolation had made me vulnerable. If I'd been more connected, more involved, maybe someone would have noticed what was happening. Maybe I wouldn't have been such an easy target. Emma was with me through all of it, helping me sort through legal documents, making sure I ate when I forgot, sitting with me on the hard nights when the betrayal felt too heavy to carry. "You're stronger than you think," she'd say. And slowly, I started to believe her. 6 months after the dinner at Sapphire Waters, I sat on my porch in the early morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over my restored garden. The bougainvillea had bloomed again, those magenta flowers cascading over the fence like they used to. The house felt like mine again, filled with memories I chose to keep and new ones I was building. I'd started volunteering at a local senior center, teaching a class on financial literacy and elder rights protection. My story had spread, and other seniors who'd been victimized by family members reached out to me for advice. I became an advocate, someone who could warn others about the signs I'd missed, the red flags I'd ignored. Trust, but verify. That became my mantra. Love your children, but protect your assets. Family is precious, but vulnerability can be exploited. These weren't cynical lessons. They were realistic ones, hard-won through painful experience. I won't lie and say I'm completely healed. There are still moments when I see a father and son together, laughing, and I feel a sharp pain in my chest for what I lost. There are nights when I dream about Jason as a little boy, before Vanessa, before the greed, when he was just my sweet child who believed in fairness and right. Those dreams hurt the most because I know that boy is gone, if he ever really existed. But I also know this. I survived. I fought back. I refused to be erased. The woman who stood on that sidewalk watching her life being loaded into a truck is not the same woman sitting on this porch today. That woman was shocked, paralyzed by betrayal. This woman is vigilant, strong, and determined never to be a victim again. Now, before I close this story, I want to share something important with you, because what happened to me could happen to anyone. The psychological dynamics in my story are textbook examples of elder financial abuse combined with familial manipulation. Elder financial abuse is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, and it's usually committed by family members. The warning signs I missed were clear in hindsight. Vanessa's increasing interest in my financial situation, the pressure to sign over control before my medical emergency, Jason's sudden change in behavior. These are all red flags that someone is being targeted. The gaslighting I experienced, where Jason and Vanessa made me doubt my own memory and perceptions, is a classic manipulation tactic used by financial abusers. They isolate their victims, make them feel confused and dependent, and use that vulnerability to maintain control. If you're listening to this and something sounds familiar, if you have an elderly parent or friend who's suddenly giving away property or money, if someone's family member is overly interested in their finances, please pay attention. Ask questions. Verify signatures. Make sure legal documents are signed in front of neutral witnesses. Here's what you can do to protect yourself or your loved ones. First, never give anyone power of attorney without having a trusted second person, like a lawyer or friend, review all the documents. Second, set up your bank account so that large transfers require multiple authorizations or waiting periods. Third, tell your loved ones your wishes clearly and document them with witnesses, so no one can claim confusion later. And if you're a victim of this kind of abuse, please know that it's not your fault. The people who commit these crimes are skilled manipulators. They prey on love and trust. You didn't fail by believing in your family. They failed by betraying that belief. There are resources available. Every state has adult protective services. The National Center on Elder Abuse has hotlines and information. Local legal aid societies often provide free or low-cost help to elder abuse victims. You don't have to fight alone. So here I am, in my Miami garden, rebuilt and resilient. The house that was almost stolen from me stands solid behind me. The life I almost lost has been reclaimed, piece by piece. I'm not the same woman I was, but maybe that's not entirely bad. I'm wiser now, warier, but also braver than I ever knew I could be. If you're listening to this from anywhere in the world, I want to ask you something. What time is it where you are? What city are you listening from? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you think Margaret, that woman who stood up to her own son and exposed the truth, did the right thing, give this video a like. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my situation. Would you have confronted them privately? Gone straight to the police? Or done what I did and exposed them publicly? I'm curious what you think, because every situation is different, and sometimes there are no perfect answers. And if this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories about real people facing impossible situations. Up on your screen now, you'll see 2 other videos I think you might find interesting. One's about a woman who discovered her husband's secret family, and the other is about a daughter who fought back against a predatory stepfather. Until the next story, take care of your heart. And remember that even in our darkest moments, we're stronger than we think. This is Margaret, signing off from Miami, reminding you that sometimes the biggest betrayals lead to the greatest transformations. Stay safe out there.